you're probably familiar with a couple of cues that we constantly use. So we're always telling people to move the barbell down a small bit lower on their back. We're always telling people to push their knees a small bit further forward. And then this idea of a good balance between anterior and posterior chain. So this is Gerf's 300 that you might have seen before. But Gerf is a great example of this. He has a high bar style back squat, or what we say is high bar mechanics. So his body is moving in a high bar pattern. His torso is fairly vertical. His knees are moving forward. He has a good balance between quads and his posterior chain. But then when we look at where the bar sits on his back, the barbell is down across the broadest part of his back and his shoulders. So this is where we call it the Sika squat, or what other people might call the mid-bar squat. And that's really what, in the last 2.5 or 3 years, we've pushed all of our athletes, all of our weightlifters, and a lot of our powerlifters towards this mid-bar style squat. It just seems to work a hell of a lot better for people and offers us much more consistent progress from cycle to cycle. So, other aspects of this mid-bar style squat are the moderate stance width. So a lot of the time with our high bars, we'll see people being very, very narrow with their stance and very toes forward. What we'll be looking for today is we'll be looking for somewhere between our hip width and our shoulder width apart. What it really depends on is how long your legs are, particularly how long your upper leg is, and how well you can move that around as you're sitting down into the bottom. But for most of you, we might look to move you either in or out, and more than likely go from this toed out position to a slightly more straight ahead position. The final thing I want you to watch then is Owen fighting with his upper back the entire time. So he really uses his upper back very, very well to maintain what's a good shelf or rack position throughout the entire rep. Even though this is a maximal rep, he works hard to hold on to it. Now, the most common thing when we bring people in and tell them about this squat is they say that Gerf is incredibly well built for squatting. You just saw him do 290 after a whole day of coaching. He's pretty good at squatting, right? He was born great at squatting and he worked very hard, but his proportions work very well. What I want you to kind of move over towards today is that this squat works very, very well, even if you're not great or well built for squatting, having very long femurs and probably a shorter torso than what your legs are. So ideally for great squats, we want short little legs, long back. It works very well to sit down easily. I'm the complete opposite of this. So this is my squat, and you'll notice the exact same things the entire time. So the barbell's going to be low down on my shoulders, on the widest part of my shoulders. You'll see that moderate stance again. Commonly, when we're looking for taller athletes, we'll get them to squat with a wider stance and have their toes more pointed out. If I want you to get anything across today, it's that moderate stances will work better for almost everyone. So rather than this idea of because you're taller and when we're being coached to squat, we'll sit wider and wider because I can kind of get my ass back and out of the way. We don't really want that. When we get our ass back and out of the way, we're really taking our quads out of the equation and going from all the way from powerlifting to weightlifting and then sports or athlete populations. Everybody needs more quad development and more leg development. So this is very much a thing. When we bring in this style of squat, don't think it's just for the genetic elite that are standing at the back of the room. It's very much for the entire population of squatters. Okay. So when we're looking at today, we'll usually be moving from the ground up. So you might be working with a partner and you might say, fucking hell, his squat's terrible. His arms are all over the place. We'll probably start with your feet and move up. And I'd recommend you do the same thing. If you know there's stuff you need to work on in your squat and you know you want to take the next 2 or 3 months to really work on technique, start somewhere and then work in a logical direction from there. So you'll see for a lot of, as you're warming up, we'll probably be starting with feet, ankles, and knees. If your feet are too wide or too narrow, it's very quick. We'll just adjust your stance and then move up from there. So a lot of you are coaching, a lot of the guys who are here today are coaching as well as athletes. This really, really helps. Having a very defined structure as the way you move or as the way you look at your squats. Same thing if you're looking at videos of you or other people squatting, try and look at the same things all the time. First time, you look at feet, ankles, knees, and hips. Next time, you might look at spinal alignment. Next time, you might look at torso. And then after 3 runs through of the video, you have a very, very good idea for what's going on. rather than the first time you see the squat saying, oh, there's something wrong there. And then the second time you try and figure out what's wrong, just pick a very defined thing on each time you watch a rep, and you'll have much better results afterwards. Okay, structures of people. This is in Uzbekistan or someplace weird a few years ago, where it's one of the only pictures of myself and Gerf are standing on the same level. But people's structures and layouts are very, very different. And as you're squatting alongside people today, you'll see some people, even though their stance width might be identical, even though they're getting the same cues, their squats are going to look very, very different from one another. And as I mentioned earlier, these are the main ratios we're talking about. The length of their torso to the length of their upper leg. Now, the shin length as well, and that relation to the upper leg will make a difference. But mostly when we see those small idiosyncrasies from person to person or from group to group, this is what we're looking at. Is that short, stumpy back and long legs, or is that long back and short legs? And this is really something, as you're watching other people or training alongside other people, just to be aware of. That's why those positions might look quite similar. We took the two of you guys here, we could give you the exact same cues. Both of you could be squatting with what we would consider to be excellent form within our framework, but the squats might look slightly different. Right, this is the ultimate example pretty much of how those structures tend to work out and how coaches will tend to work around those structures. So this is somebody who's very well built for a high bar squat. This is somebody who's not well built for squatting, but will low bar squat instead. All of what we just talked about earlier today is we want to get away from this idea of directly manipulating your technique and trying to bring it alongside to, oh, we're going to push you over to low bar squatting, or you're going to be great at high bar squatting. I would really recommend getting more towards a general framework that you're going to use with more people and get them squatting as best they possibly can, rather than this idea of kind of pigeonholing one person in here or pigeonholing one person into another. Another time you'll really commonly see this, if you're involved with rugby groups or involved with rowers, a lot of rugby strength coaches will really like low bar squatting. And obviously low bar squats can be really useful. It's really important to have very strong glutes and back. But a lot of the time they're pushing people in that direction because their ankle mobility isn't great and they haven't squatted a massive amount. So the low bar kind of gets them to a squat a small bit faster. I would be trying to stay away from this kind of pigeonholing as much as we can. Okay, foot position and centers of pressure then is the next thing we want to look at. Generally speaking, you probably don't think about where the weight is too much on your feet when you're squatting, but this will make a gigantic difference to how much of that leg musculature we can recruit. So as I unrack the barbell from the rack, I usually take a step back. I'll probably place my feet. I'll try not to be looking down towards the floor when I'm doing it. I really don't want that kind of extended position here. I also don't need to be looking down at the floor. My feet have been attached to me most days since I was born, so I have a fairly good idea where they are. So I walk back, I'll take 2 steps, and then I'll just center my stance here. Trying not to look down, I'll make sure my feet are well set. And then the next question is, what should the feeling be like on my foot? You're going to hear us today as we walk around telling probably 50% of the room to keep the weight centered on your foot. Now, weight centered on your foot will look like this position here. What most of us will do is we will go from weight more towards our toes as we walk the barbell out. Then as I get set, I'll sit the weight back and you'll see people's toes coming up off the ground. And then as they drive up and forward, they'll tend to move the weight forward again on their foot. So it's this almost seesaw or rocking motion. We really want to try and get away from that as much as we possibly can. It just helps us with the total amount of muscle we can recruit, and also obviously helps us to be a bit more balanced in terms of tipping over or falling back with the barbell. So this is generally what we want. Weight somewhere in around here. We might say center pressure, and I know that might make a bit more sense underneath your arch, but generally speaking, the ball of your big toe, that line going straight across your foot, that's where we want the pressure to be. Okay, prime movers then, and this is probably where a lot of you will have the most coaching input today. I want the prime movers to be mainly your quads, and then your abs and your erectors in your back are going to work the hardest. So for today, as you're sitting through the squats, as you're getting reps in, we're going to be doing a small bit of volume as we start off today. I really want you to try and be feeling your quads working as much as we possibly can. We're yet to come across people who can't get their glutes or their back to work in a squat, particularly as they start to tilt forward a small bit. But a massive amount of people will have that thing where they don't recruit their legs quite as much as they will. So if we're getting you to do your squats, and I'm telling you to slow down as you sit down into the bottom position, or we might be getting you to pause just above that fully bottomed out position, what we're really looking for there is a bit more tension in the quads, and this idea of developing the quads with the squat. The glutes, the hamstrings, all of that other stuff will kick in. It's damn good at kicking in and usually kicks in a bit too early and a bit too often. So don't worry about it too much. Mainly, and if you're going to be tired anywhere in the morning or sore, it's probably going to be your quads. The second thing then is your abs and your back. They're mainly in here for a section we'll talk about later on, and that will be the accessories we use for the back squat. Core work, and particularly just bog standard isometric core work, is the most underused thing in terms of your squatting. There is a massive move towards this idea of functional core strength built through the use of the squat or the deadlift, and that being sufficient for all of the squatting and deadlifting you're going to need. If we've learned anything in the last 10 years, it's that more core work more often will be hugely beneficial. So we talked at the very start, the first slide today was you saw Owen fighting with that upper back to get the upper back in a good position and to hold the barbell steady. The core work is what really allows him to do that. He has a massive upper back, and so you'll see the traps and the subscaps working a lot, but really it's his core working to allow him to extend a bit more through the mid back will allow him to get there. If you've run the Road to Anywhere squat program or the second one or any of the weightlifting blocks, you'll have done the prone back extension holds and all of those other side planks and things like that. That's why they're in there, unless you skipped all the accessories. So the core, I can't overemphasize this enough, how important that isolation core work is. The final thing about that is it's almost free. It doesn't hurt you. It really doesn't fatigue you all that much. It might tighten down and you might need a bit of opening up just the next morning. But in terms of fatigue, both muscular fatigue and central nervous system fatigue, that core work really isn't going to cost you anything. If you were to get the same kind of stimulus with quad growth or something like that, and to use even something really low impact like a belt squat, you'll still have a lot of DOMs going on the next day. If you were to do some higher intensity weighted isometrics, you'd get some central nervous system fatigue going on. Bog standard planks, side planks, peel-off press will be unbelievably effective with almost no downside. Okay, I just wanted to bring up this slide here to show you this lower bar position. Did I rob someone from the front row? I'll rob you because I'm looking at you already. Okay. When we're looking, you can just keep your back there. Perfect. So when we're looking for this widest spot on the back, if I'm looking at him from behind and I want to palpate and find it, you'll find that bony process back here. So just reach over your own back. You'll find that bony process just at the back of your shoulder blade or at the back of your shoulder socket. Everyone feel it? I want you to think about sitting the barbell on top of that piece of bone. So palpate just above it. You'll find where that is. You can sit down. That's perfect. Thanks for that. This is where we want the barbell to sit. For most of us, the bottom of the bar will sit just on top of that, but this is really where we're aiming to get with that. Now, what comes along with that slightly lower bar position is a slightly more challenging position to hold on to. So generally speaking, if I have a barbell up nice and high on my traps, you'll see Gabriel has a lovely high bar squat. The bar sits right up on top of his traps like this. That's an okay position to hold on to. My wrists and shoulders aren't under a massive amount of pressure. What we want you to do today now is go from this to moving the barbell down slightly, which puts my shoulders under a lot more pressure. This idea of maintaining a rack position, like we will for the front rack or like we will for a jerk position, this is something you'll have to kind of work on and get used to. This isn't something where I'll be unable to unrack the bar and kind of scoop my hands out wide and stand there for ages without any major pressure. There should be a little voice screaming in your head once you unrack the bar in this kind of tighter mid-bar position where you're really working to get a straight angle at the wrist. You want knuckles pointed pretty much straight up towards the ceiling. And then the last thing is the line of my elbow should be behind the line of my torso. So I'm not going to be driving up super high like this. What I'm working for the entire time is that elbow to be proud behind me rather than allowing the elbows to scoot in underneath. Does anyone have any questions on those things?